and welcome to this review of Chapter 7 from the Isham textbook, Decontamination, Point of Use, Preparation, and Transport. Okay, please turn to page 119 and look at the learning objectives of this chapter. As a result of successfully completing this chapter, readers will be able to review the four main goals of soiled item preparation and transport. Identify the sources of contaminated items. Explain point of use preparation procedures. Review basic procedures to transport soiled items from user areas to the central service decontamination area. And identify basic sources for education and training information applicable to the transport of contaminated items. And this room you see behind me, this is the source of the majority of contaminated items, and this is where the decontamination process should begin. And you thought it was the decontamination room. No, it should begin in the operating room. Now there's several reasons for this, and here we are in the decontamination room. The reasons why it should begin in the operating room are because if you allow the gross soil to sit on the instruments for an extended length of time, they will damage the instruments. The gross soil will become harder to clean, and it will create biofilm as it sits. Now, a biofilm is it's not really detectable. You can't see it. You can maybe feel it if it gets really thick, like on the bottom of a pet's water bowl. Go clean your pet's water bowl right now. Biofilms are a collection of microorganisms that attach to surfaces and to each other and form a colony. The colony produces a protective gel that's very difficult to penetrate with detergents and disinfectants. And you can't sterilize something that has biofilm on it. I mean, you can try, but it's not going to become sterile. You need to treat the instruments at the point of use. So remove gross soil. The goals of point of use preparation and transport are you should remove gross soil. One goal is to prevent damage of the instruments. Another goal is to prevent cross-contamination. And another goal is to keep other people safe. So as I stated earlier, in the operating room is where the majority of the contaminated instruments come from. There are other places where contaminated instruments can come from. We're talking about labor and delivery, the catheterization lab, X-ray even can be a source for contaminated instruments. Now, while the contaminated instruments are awaiting transport, they must be stored in a place or held in a place which is marked as a biohazard area. So on page 121, look at the blue box. It explains how things are held before they're returned to sterile processing. And at point of use is where the decontamination process should begin. Okay, now I'm on page 122 if you're following along in your book. Some guidelines for point of use preparation. Gross soil should be removed from instruments while wearing the appropriate PPE. And what is the appropriate PPE? Protective equipment for dealing with biohazards. It is going to be your face shield, your mask, your gloves, your impervious gown, your hair covering, and shoe covers. So as it happens, the user departments are probably already wearing this, these items. Reusable sharps should be separated from non-sharp instruments. So we're talking about things like Gelpies or osteotomes and things of that nature. They can cut you, they're sharp. They should be separated at point of use and sent down separately. This is to protect the people in our department in the decontamination room from getting accidentally cut or stabbed. Disposable sharps should be disposed of at point of use into a hard-sided red disposal container that's marked as a biohazard. Reusable linen should be separated at point of use. It can be laundered and sent back to the hospital, but it should be separated at point of use. If they're sending this linen down to your department, then that is the policy of your hospital, and it's okay. They should not be sending disposable sharps down to your department. This can be a real hazard for you, a hazard to your health and safety. So another thing that should happen at point of use is all hinged instruments, things like scissors and things like that that have a hinge on them, they should be opened up and wiped down, and they should remain in the open unlocked position as they're being transported. Instruments should be kept moist. Okay. Moisture will promote the growth of biofilm, but moisture will also keep the instruments from drying out. And as the instruments dry out, any soil that remains on the instruments will become more difficult to remove. And this can slow down the process, and it can even lead to the patient getting an infection because there's still some gross soil left on the instruments when we get through with the cleaning process. So it's best to leave them moist for transportation. This can be accomplished by perhaps taking a wet towel and laying it over the instruments as they're about to be transported to the sterile processing decontamination room. Okay. So also at point of use, they should empty the fluids from containers, like the suction containers or basins that have sterile water in them, perhaps some instruments soaking in bloody water. These are common sites to see returning to the decontamination room, but water in a container like this should not be sent out to the decontamination room. It should be disposed of at point of use. Sometimes there are third-party reprocessing items which do not need to go down to our department, and they can be put into a special container up at the point of use in the operating room. These containers are usually green. You might say something like Stryker Sustainability Services on them. And so what they do is they'll collect these bins and they will take out what they can reprocess, and they will reprocess it. We can't reprocess it because we don't have the clearance from the Food and Drug Administration. If something was used at point of use that was used in a case that has known or suspected CJD, excuse me, CS should be notified, and the infection prevention and control should be notified. Following hospital procedures for initial cleaning and containment for transport to the CS decontamination area. So the vast majority, almost everything, I've been in this field for many years, and I never saw a case come down that had prions, which cause CJD, actually on the instruments. But there should be a policy in your hospital for how to dispose of these. So it is such a rare occurrence that you are going to need to get the infection prevention department involved. It could end up with these instruments just being completely destroyed and thrown in a burn box. Another thing that is the responsibility of the user department is if they should be aware that some instrument needs repair or is broken beyond repair, they should notify the CS department. It is true that it is part of our job to inspect instruments, but things can get overlooked. So if the user becomes aware of something that needs to be sharpened, maybe a scissors that needs to be sharpened, they need to let us know. They should also notify us about things that need to be turned over or turned around. So a turnaround is when you need something back to the OR or to the user department for a same-day case. Example would be, let's say we have 2 craniotomy sets and there are 3 craniotomies scheduled. Well, our department, doing its due diligence, is probably already aware that we're short by 1 set. However, the OR or the user department should also inform us that they're bringing us a set that needs to be turned over or turned around for a later case. If they fail to do that, I can't help you. they usually do it. Transporting soiled items. So the vast majority of the things that go out to be used are going to the OR, and they go in these case carts. It can be short case carts or tall case carts. The cart is full of sterile instrument sets and supplies. Now, when they're done with this procedure, they will send the instrument sets down to the decontamination room, hopefully having done the point of use preparation, removing gross soil, leaving the instruments moist, separating the reusable sharps from the non-sharp items, protecting the people who are transporting and the environment from cross-contamination. So they will come down in the same carts. But sometimes things might come from, like, say, the emergency department, and they use just a small, like a thoracotomy set or a chest tube insertion set. There's no case cart involved with this. So look at your page 125. You should have these in your department. There it is. Those are hard-sided containers that are marked for biohazard. They contain lids that may or may not lock. Nothing that is a biohazard, i.e. used on a patient, should ever be carried through a hospital without being in one of these containers or in a case cart where it has shutting doors. So if there's just something small, they can bring it in a hard-sided container. Okay, the transportation of contaminated items should be kept physically separate from the transportation of clean and sterile items. Why is this even an issue? Well, let me give you an example. You work in a big hospital, and you have to go and you have to deliver sterile sets. Okay, so it's going to feel like you've been walking half a mile. You get there, you unload your sterile sets, and you're tempted to go past the room where there's probably dirty sets. Okay, well, if you have nothing else in your cart that needs to be delivered to another department, you can pick up the dirty sets. But if you do have something in your cart that's sterile and needs to be delivered to another department, you're just going to have to walk past them and then go back and pick them up later. You can never mix sterile and dirty, or clean and dirty. If you do, you have nothing but dirty and dirty. Excuse me. I'm on page 126 if you're counting, if you're following along. Okay. Contaminated items from other departments are often placed in a holding area for pickup on a scheduled basis by a CS tech, who then returns them to the decontamination area for processing. Soil pickup rounds should be performed as scheduled. If you fail to do soil pickup rounds as scheduled, you could be setting yourself up for a shortage of equipment and instruments. Sometimes the point of use, oftentimes the point of use preparation is not actually done. And so what's happening is the gross soil is sitting on there, the blood is sitting on there, and blood is very bad for instruments. It's highly saline, and blood will start to destroy the top layer of the instruments, which is the passivation layer. Okay, so not only can you get shortages, you can destroy the instruments or damage them. And ultimately, this is bad for patients. Some safety guidelines for soiled item transport. All instruments, utensils, and equipment used in patient care and treatment processes should be considered contaminated. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't look contaminated. It doesn't matter if it doesn't look like they used it. Consider it to be contaminated. It was dispensed for patient care. It's coming back to us. We're going to put it through the cleaning process according to the instructions for use from the manufacturer. Everything is contaminated. Consider you took up an IV pump for the patient in room 520, and the nurse said, "Oh, I don't need this anymore." And then she touched it with hands or gloves. They have bacteria on them. Maybe it's MRSA bacteria. And she takes it and she sets it on the charge nurse's desk and says, "Can you call SPD and tell them we don't need this IV pump?" So we go pick it up and say, "Hey, the cord's still wrapped up. They didn't use it. I can just put it back into the equipment storeroom and plug it into the wall." So that's a no on that, because it was dispensed for patient care, and it could contain bacteria on the surface that you can't see. Let's not make assumptions. This is patient's health we're talking about. Anytime there is a danger of splashes, spills, or aerosol exposure, CS Tech should wear the appropriate PPE, which is required by OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. CS Techs who clean and decontaminate soiled instruments must also follow OSHA regulations for PPE. All right, I'm on page 127. This is the last page in the chapter. Off-site processing. So this is true. Sometimes things must be shipped by vehicle to a different facility for processing. I'll give you an example. A broken flexible endoscope. Now it's failed a leak test, and so we can't put it through the full cleaning and disinfection process, because by doing so we could cause further damage to the instrument. So in something like this, in this case, it's going to have to be sent out to wherever the repair facility is, following Department of Transportation guidelines. No, there are no Department of Transportation guidelines that cover transportation of clean or sterile instruments. It's the soiled ones that there's a guidelines over because of the health hazards to the people involved and the community. Okay, thank you for watching this video, and I look forward to hearing any comments that you have.